Hi everyone, my name is Daphne Galatis. I'm a 2015 graduate of UNH Manchester, received an MPA from UNH in 2018. I currently serve proudly on the UNH Alumni Association Board of Directors. The UNH Alumni Association serves as the bedrock of UNH alumni community, working to connect alumni to each other and to UNH. Thank you so much for supporting UNH with your time today. We encourage you to take a look and take advantage of your Wildcat benefits by visiting UNH Alumni Relations website. And don't forget the 603 challenge right around the corner. This webinar, Talking to Your Children About Race, is another episode in-depth on inclusion series presented by UNH Alumni Relations. Our moderator is Michelle Holt-Shannon. Michelle is the director and co-founder of New Hampshire Listens. Our expert panelists will answer questions at the end of the webinar, so please note Q&A box at the bottom of your screen where you can submit your questions throughout the program. Now, on with the program. Michelle, take it on.
Thank you, Daphne. And I happen to know Daphne just added to her family, so she will probably be paying attention. We actually, across our panel, represent folks with kids from a month or two to 26. So looking forward to some relating in on this. I'm glad to be with you. I co-founded and direct New Hampshire Listens, and we work all over the state, helping people talk to each other about a lot of different things. And this emphasis on talking to young children is near and dear to my heart. And really excited to be here with you all today with our panelists, Andrea Encarnacio, Sarah Leonard, and Andres Mejia. And I would love to have each of you just introduce yourselves briefly. And Andrea, I'd like to start with you.
Thank you, Michelle. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Encarnacio Martin. I am a guidance counselor at Boston Latin School, and I graduated from UNH in 2001 from the College of Liberal Arts with a BA in psychology. I played soccer at UNH, and I was the captain my senior year. And I've been a guidance counselor in the Boston Public Schools for 18 years. I've worked with students in grades 9 through 12 for most of my career, but this year I'm working with the 7th and 8th grade students at our school. And I also work with my colleagues on our team called the Ideal Team. So we work to bring in and talk about race in our school. We actually have a professional development this afternoon just about that. And I also am part of the Massachusetts School Counselors Association IDEA committee.
So thank you, Andrea. Sarah.
Yeah, I'm Sarah Jewel Leonard. I'm a graduate of the University of New Hampshire, class of 2000, where I studied human development and family studies. I am a teacher at the Child Study and Development Center, where I've been since I graduated. So 22 years working with infants, toddlers, and preschoolers. In addition to my work with young children, I also am a mentor teacher for our undergraduate practicum students within the department, and also with our occupational therapy department. Sometimes we have psychology students who are interning with us. I've also been in roles as a teacher coach and adjunct faculty member. And I've been doing some anti-bias work with children in my classrooms and also the children I have in my home since about 2003.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. And Sarah and I've been feeling old because my oldest daughter, Noah, was in Sarah's class when my spouse was a hall director in Smith Hall. So Smithies, I see you. Please, Andres Mejia, introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andres Mejia. My pronouns are he, him, his. I identify as Black, Latinx, cis man. I graduated from UNH, my Bachelor's of Science in Social Work, with 2 minors, Race, Culture, Power, and Women's Studies. And then I got my graduate degree in Community Development and Policy over at the Carsey School of Public Policy. I worked in different roles at UNH. I worked in the admissions office as one of their admissions counselors. I then went and worked for the Connect program as the coordinator. And the Connect program is a recruitment and retention program for students of color and first generation low income college students. And then I was a program manager for New Hampshire Listens, working with Michelle. And now I serve as the Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion for the Exeter Regional Cooperative School District over at SAU 16. I am highly involved in DI work. I'm on the board of directors for Black Lives Matter Seacoast chapter. I'm on the leadership team for the Equity Leadership Fellowship here in New Hampshire, and I also serve on the advisory group for the New Hampshire Equity Race and Equity Series for the Endowment for Health.
Awesome. Thank you, Andres. And thanks all of you for being here. I just know with our pre-meeting that there's a lot of great information that you have to share for folks. And I'm thinking, we've got 70 of us here right now. There'll probably be a few more people that join. And I think about our audience being a mix of all kinds of identities. And also just that right now in this time in our state, there's a real divide around whether talking about something helps or hurt. And so when we're talking about race and racism, what's okay, what's not okay, what fits, in conversations with young kids, medium-sized kids, older kids, all of that. So I'm excited to dig into that. I want to start first by asking you all to address the question of why is it important to talk to children about race? And Andres, we'll start with you. You're muted still. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I think it's important to talk to children about race because one of the very important parts is our demographics are changing in our world, in our country. And I speak more of the context of New Hampshire. Our numbers are getting higher. Students from different identities, historically marginalized identities, students of color are increasing here in our state. I'm using CARSI data. Our numbers over the past decade have increased by 4.6%. Around, and this is all not just children or students. This is people in all ages of diversity in our state around people of color. And then you look at students, children under 18 are leading in that rise of diversity. 20.2% under age 18 population belong to a minority group. In between 2010 and 2020. We grew students between, under the age of 18, children under the age of 18 grew at 47.9% in 10 years. So it shows just, yes, the number seems lower when it comes to, the overall population of all ages. But when you look at under 18, we're almost at 50% increase in just 10 years of children who come from different, marginalized backgrounds, students of color. So I think that's one of the important parts.
Yeah, the demographic changes and that note of under 18 that stood out to me when I saw that as well. How about you, Andrea? Why should we do this?
Yes, it's very important to talk to children about race. I think sometimes that we shy away from it because we have to talk about racism, which is part of a painful history that we, have in this country. And so I think sometimes it is shied away from in that regard. But, I read Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum's book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? Highly recommend it. And she has some great TED Talks too that you can check out that are really good. And actually she really addresses, talking to young children. She gives an example of talking to her son when he was younger. It's really great. And so I think about those lessons that I learned reading her book. But I also kind of think about my own experience. I grew up in a predominantly white town where my family was, one of, I would say, two Black families in the town. And we really did not talk about it in school. My family talked about it, but we didn't talk openly about it except for, MLK Day or Black History Month, which really should be, Black history should be, American history should be part of the story. But but unfortunately, it's still a battle right now, and it's really important to talk about, encourage families to talk about it, and schools to really lean into and look at how they can celebrate and value Black lives.
Thank you. Dr. Tatum's book is a great one. Maybe folks can throw that into chat. She's a psychologist, and there you go. Her TED Talk is one of them is my skin brown because I drank chocolate milk, which is maybe the kind of question a kid might ask. How about you, Sarah?
Yeah, the first thing I think of when people ask the question of why should we be having conversations with children around race is, why wouldn't we be having conversations with children around race? It makes me really think about the privilege that people may hold when you're a parent of a child of color. You're having those conversations very, very young. And if you don't have a child who is a child of color, you may not necessarily be thinking about having those conversations. When I think about things that are happening in our country around some of the laws that are being put into place around what can be taught and what can't be taught, I go back to this piece of human diversity is not divisive. Human diversity is part of who we are. And I really think back to my own experience in school. I had just a small chunk of time where I was enrolled in a school in St. Louis, and that was in 1983. And during that time, there was corporal punishment. And as a 5-year-old, I figured out within a month of being at school that if you were a child who was white who got in trouble, there were no consequences. And if you were a child who was Black who got in trouble, you got paddled, and you got paddled publicly in the classroom. And so I came home and asked my mom, why is it okay for Black kids to be hit and not white kids? And she just kind of like, all stopped, like, what's going on? And so I kind of forced her to start having those conversations with me, but it wasn't something she had necessarily thought that she needed to have before that point. So children are noticing things all of the time, and we want to get them the information that is important and helpful for them to be able to grow as humans.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I do think that, there's a group of folks who feel like if we talk about it, we're just giving people more of an opportunity to become racist. What do you say to that thought, Sarah? We'll start with you and then I'll keep going around.
Yeah, I really look at the work that I have done with Louise Derman Sparks, and she talks a lot about the hurtful power of silence, and that when we're not having those conversations, that silence actually robs children of the vocabulary that they need to be able to have these conversations. It requires children to figure things out on their own when they may not necessarily be at a place developmentally where they can do that. It teaches fear. If the grownups that I love and trust are so afraid of this topic, then I certainly shouldn't be having this conversation. And it forces children to rely on sources that are maybe not as accurate. So they might be listening to a friend on the playground, or they might be listening to an older sibling that doesn't have all of the information, that's made their own, deductions from what they've overheard, to give them the data they need.
Yeah. Andrea, Andres, either of you want to chime in on that one? Go ahead, Andrea.
Yeah, no, just to add to Sarah's comment too, I was, as I was reading Dr. Tatum's book too, I wrote down a few quotes, and actually one that came up was, sometimes the assumptions we make about others come not from what we have been told or what we have been seen on TV or in the books, but rather from what we have not been told. So I think it's important, exactly what we're doing here today, in schools, to talk about race, and just as Sarah said, it's important, and it's definitely necessary.
Yeah, so don't leave a vacuum. The vacuum's going to get filled. Yeah. Andres?
Yeah, I think I don't think that talking about race makes us more racist. I think that not talking about it does. We all know that we grew up in society and are socialized and grew up in these systems that were not built for many identities. and not built by many identities. And I think it's important to recognize that so that we don't keep making the same mistakes. If we're not teaching our children about what racism is and what it looks like, how do they know that they're doing something right or wrong? Or you know, and so that's like a part of why I think it's important to talk about race. And another part is, and Sarah spoke about it earlier, is the privilege, you know, of certain families and identities not having to talk about racism. You know, I know because of those systems and socialization that my child, as a Black child, is going to deal with more issues because people have biases. We see things in certain ways, and until we start to unpack those, why we see certain people as violent or scary or negative, or that was not a kid just being a kid, that was actually this person being violent, you know, or being aggressive, compared to white students, when we just say that was just a kid being a kid, or that was just a boy being a boy. You know, when you look at other identities, you have to talk about these things so that we don't make those same mistakes. And the reality is, going back to when I first started talking, is as people we're not in our bubbles. Once we grow up, you know, I was a child before, now I'm an adult, and I decided to leave Boston, where I was born and raised, and now I'm in New Hampshire. You know, where the majority of people, the majority of spaces I sit in, out of 500 people, I'm the only person of color in that space. You know, if I would have just learned how Boston was and diversity there, then I probably would have not been able to, you know, and not know that there was other races and other perspectives, then I would have not survived here in New Hampshire. And vice versa. People who live here in New Hampshire, who at their dinner table or out at their couch or in their homes or in the classrooms, the school groups they're part of, if they're only around white people all the time, when they go to the university, or if they don't go to university, go get jobs and travel to different parts of the world, they have to learn how to understand other people's perspectives and be in space with these people. So it's not only understanding, but how do you live? How do you understand? How do you listen? How do you give and take from each other? And that has to happen. You have to start talking about race now.
Yeah, it's easy to just believe the stereotypes.
Yeah.
I you know, families love their kids. There's a ton of adults out there who work with children every day, in schools and in all kinds of settings. You know, but people nobody wants to mess it up. So what are some of the things that we need to keep in mind when it comes to talking to children about race? And we'll get into some of maybe the age differences in a little bit, but what are some of the things that you think are important to pay attention to when you're opening these conversations with all kinds of kids, your own white kids, kids of color, multiracial kids, who, you know, yeah. Andrea.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important to think about where the students are coming from, or if it's your own children, you know, their experiences. So meeting them where they're at. So and thinking about maybe some of the stereotypes that they, you know, may have been exposed to. And being able to, you know, talk that through with them. And so, you know, even for my own children, I have a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old. So, you know, asking them asking them questions about, you know, what did you hear? What do you know, you know, about that? Tell me more. So I think being, you know, asking them questions and keeping in mind, you know, where they're coming from and their experience, because it can definitely be different from ours. I know my children are growing up here in Boston. And again, like I mentioned, I grew up in a predominantly white town. We're growing up, we're raising our children in a diverse neighborhood. And we go to a Black Catholic church that they're, having exposure to, to our religion and everything through that experience. So I think, asking questions and having them come to you, maybe just keeping that door open so that they're able to, to have those conversations and be able to approach you.
Yeah, thank you. Sarah?
My first thought when you asked that question, Michelle, was you're going to screw up. Like I screw up all the time. And I think part of my process as a teacher and as a parent is owning it. When I say something that I probably shouldn't have said, being able to go back and say, you know what, I've been thinking a lot about something that we talked about. And I used some information that wasn't helpful. I used some information that I learned when I was little. And so now I've done some reading and I think differently, and really talking about kind of my own process of problem solving and reflection. I think that that's a huge piece of it. And I think being really authentic with that. I think if you go into talking to children about anything and you have the perspective that you're not going to mess up, you're already failing yourself. So I think there's this grace and permission around figuring it out yourself too.
Yeah, and showing the learning part of it. One of my favorite UNH grads, near and dear to my heart, Irish Italian young woman, married a Chinese American man, and she is asked all the time if her two daughters are hers, or if they were adopted. And so it was talking with my own kids about the questions that they answer that we didn't have to answer about whether our kids were ours. And why did they think they could ask those questions? You know, it was someone they knew and cared about, and we were able to just sort of, you know, talk about that. Yeah, Andres, what are some of the things that come to mind for you about how?
I think how is putting as many words as you can, so that the child can understand what you're talking about. Try to connect it to real life experiences, and try to connect it to all the different parts of whatever you're talking about. So if I'm talking about racism, you know, I'm not only going to talk about the color of your skin. I might talk about the texture of your hair. I might talk about the different kind of name you have. I might talk about the different kind of smell in the food that you eat. You know, so that's all the different parts that connect to race and racism. So that's what I mean by trying to talk about the same topic with a lot of different parts of their life. And you know, when it comes to talking to students, like saying that we want to recognize our differences, and accept our differences, and it's okay to be different. And when we're different, we don't treat each other bad or wrong just because we're different. And then I had the opportunity of going into elementary school 2 weeks ago and reading to little kids in 1st grade through 5th grade, and that was pretty fun for me. And that
whole nother level.
and the book was about differences across the world. We all have hearts. We all, you know, have smiles. We all have emotions. When we're mad, we're mad. When we're sad, we're sad. Like we're happy. You know, but we also all have our differences. You know, and bringing that into our space and our community, in our world. And a lot of us are taught that when you're different, we treat you different. No, when you're different, we accept you and we want you to be even closer. I want you to be part of my circle. I want to learn all about you, and just respect that and understand it and accept it. That's the biggest part. Accept the difference, and don't think it could be a different way. Sorry, I went.
No, that's great. I'm actually going to stay with you for a second, because you are working in a place with, you know, with students just like Andrea, and I'm coming to you next. Is the, you know, is anything different when you're talking to white kids versus when you're talking to kids of color? Like, is there anything that you keep in mind or do differently when that's the case?
Yeah, you want to go, Andrea, and then I.
Sure. Well, I would just definitely say that it's not a all, you know, one size fits all approach. talking with students of color, not all of the students of color have the same experience, nor, for the students, the white students or any, BIPOC population. So I think remembering that as you talk with students, I'm thinking of when I talk with my own students, but I think that that's a piece too, is that everyone brings a different perspective and point of view, to the conversation. So keeping those things in mind as you talk with children. I think I try to remember that myself. I said, my experience, I'm a person of color, but I grew up in a predominantly white town. So my perspective and understanding of my own identity and how I relate is different. So I think you have to kind of remember those pieces and honoring and celebrating that as you talk to students. And just like Andre said, really kind of bringing in the different pieces of it too as you're having that conversation.
Yeah, thanks. Andres and then Sarah.
Yeah, I would say, like Andrea said, it's not the same, like for one size fits all. Like I'm going to talk to every student. Everyone has their different parts of their life and different identities and and different experiences that make them see a certain situation a certain way. And I also agree that you talk, I do, if I'm talking to a student, we're talking about learning stuff. I'm talking to a white student. I might talk about let's learn about what this means. What does this look like? And when I talk to a student of color, I am doing the same thing. Let's talk about what this looks like, what this means. Let's put vocabulary to your feelings. There's actually other people that go through this as well. And at the same time, I'm pushing, that you are powerful. You're a special person. The fact that you're able to deal with it, because we all know, and like I keep connecting it to socialization and what we watch and what gets fed to us from when we're little kids to even now, me as an adult, stereotypes, who's good, who's bad, what's pretty, what's ugly. That you have, that's part of when the students hearing these things, they have those thoughts behind in their mind as well. So I have to give the comments like you're powerful, because the reality is they are powerful for even being in that space, for people to have that conversation, to still wake up and go to school every day, knowing that they might have to deal with racism, knowing that people might talk about their hair on the school bus. They're still putting themselves in those spaces and navigating life, even though they might be dealing with it a certain way, they're still putting themselves in their spaces. So it's having that conversation with them. And that's just, my answer.
Yeah, no, that emphasis on you're resilient, that's actually one of the things that Dr. Tatum talks about in her work as well. Sarah, different approaches, anything different depending on the race of the child?
I think that, part of my work in early childhood is so centered around family perspective. And so those are conversations, we're having conversations with families the minute they walk through the door here at the Child Study and Development Center, to really talk to them about their family culture, but also what their hopes and dreams are for their child. I think the other part too is that we never want children to feel as though they are the sole representation for their own race. We want them to feel celebrated, but not that they have to own sharing what that means for themselves with everyone else. And for me, there's this piece of evolutionary thinking, right? So when I was in high school, I was like, oh yes, Benetton, you've got it right. It's, I'm totally colorblind. This is going into school. I'm going to be a teacher and this is my perspective. Whereas now I'm like, absolutely not. That is not the way that I approach working with children or their families, that if I'm not able to see who they are, I'm not able to do my best work and they're not able to do their best work. So I think that those are some of the nuances. And I mean, this year I'm working with infants and we're already having conversations about eye color, skin color, hair color, and that we slowly build upon their understanding of their identity to understanding diversity, and then to justice and activism.
Well, and I want to stick with you because you are working with the littles and the littlest. And, you know, one of the things that comes up a lot is age appropriate, you know, what's age appropriate. And Andrea said, one of the reasons people hesitate to talk about race is because we don't want to talk about racism. And so how do you handle determining age appropriateness?
Yeah, I think, you know, there was something else Andrea said that really struck me, and it was, it made me think about the adult perspective versus the child perspective. You know, when children are asking questions, you've really got to put that lens on of what are they thinking about? What's their thinking? Of course, I have my own perspective as an adult, either through the experiences I've had or I have not had. But I'm always trying to dig at what they're really curious about. And for me, when I kind of think of that starting point and what's developmentally appropriate, I think about how I set up my classroom and what materials are available. Same thing in my home. So I think about the books that I might have. There's a new book or a new series of books, Megan Madison, Jessica Rowley, and Isabel Rackus. They have a number. One of them is Our Skin. They've got one about being you, that's about gender identity, another one about consent. And I think that books in general offer a really delightful entry point. I also think about, like, when I have baby dolls out, I don't have baby dolls of one race. I have baby dolls of a varying race, because you allow children the opportunity to learn through play. And that's really critical with young children. When young children are playing, they are working through all the different things that they're thinking about. So we want to create a space that really complements that and also engages them in inquiry.
Right.
Yeah, and I just want to, you know, add on to that. You know, if talking about dolls, you know, I'm pretty sure everyone has heard of the doll test. It's one that we throw out. You know, a lot of years back they did a doll test. You know, and they asked students, children, you know, what doll do you prefer? And these were kids, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and many of them preferred the white doll. Students of color, white students, they preferred the white doll. When they asked the students, why do you prefer the white doll? You know, some of them would say because the dark one's mean, or the dark one is ugly. And then they would ask, which one looks mostly like you, and they'll point to the dark doll. You know, so there, those tests that happen, that doesn't matter what race you are, you still preferred a white doll. That was done in the 40s. Similar tests were done in 2017 to 2020. You know, people, and they did it differently. They didn't ask these questions. They just put dolls out and they let they observed the children, you know, second graders and first graders picking what doll they wanted, you know, like, and they didn't tell them, oh, pick a doll. They just observed daily. And most of the students still chose dolls that were lighter skins. So they had a mixture. It was not just black or white. It was, you know, black, white, brown, different cultures. And still the dolls that were touched the less were the darkest dolls. So that's why it's important to talk about race. And there's no age appropriation, because even in our biases, you know, or what we're watching, I think about now, all the little kids, this big thing is like Coco Melon. You know, the main character in Coco Melon is and then the main family is always a white family. Yes, they have a little black family that shows up here and there, but the ones that do everything, learn everything the right way, is the white family in Coco Melon. So that's what kids, which there's nothing wrong with that, but that's what kids are being exposed to if they're watching TV right now. You know, it's that's what they see as, oh, the popular one, or the most important, or the valued one in the cartoon is a white kid. So that must be like that in real life, even though they're not, you know, intentionally saying in the cartoon Coco Melon, white is better than black. But you always see that character in a leadership role, even from kindergarten all the way to, you know, whatever TV shows we watch as adults. So that's just it's never too late. I mean, too early to talk about racism.
Well, and that, you know, that's a pattern across media. It's changing, but it doesn't seem to be changing fast enough. like the classic, I've seen a Disney princess that looks like me, sort of a question that only recently has started to change. Anything else about different ages and what's important to think about it at different ages? Certainly with little kids, but middle school, high school, the times when they're making friends, thoughts about that?
I would just add, being very intentional about what kids are watching and reading, as we talked a little bit more about, and listening to, and being able to step up and call it out if you're seeing it really occur in your space. I think, obviously representation matters, and something that I often raising, two young Black, beautiful daughters of my own, make sure that, we have a Black doctor, we that representation across as many fields as possible it occurs. So I think that they're seeing that in their world, and they're not just seeing, straight hair and blonde hair is the most beautiful. I think of, growing up, my grandmother was a hairdresser, and my family is Cape Verdean, and I have curly hair, but my grandmother always commented, always said, "Oh, your hair is beautiful," when we would straighten it. So it also just kind of made me think, later growing up, like that's messed up kind of thing, that's not okay. But I definitely try to, bring that perspective and remember that in my own daughters. And, one of my daughters has a beautiful afro, and I just love that. I'm not sure what my grandmother would say now, but I absolutely love and celebrate. And we read books too that really, celebrate her beautiful hair. So.
Yeah, no, one of my favorite metaphors, and I'm not going to remember the writers about this, but for what curriculum should look like, and even how we should think about it in our own families, you were talking about representation, is that, kids need, to a mirror, they need to see themselves reflected, and they need a window into another world. And I think sometimes for me in New Hampshire, raising white kids, it was harder to give them the window into another world. It was easy to see themselves reflected, right? But we needed more of that. I guess the one thing I want to tip to, and then we'll see what kind of questions come in, is what do adults need to be thinking about in order to be in these, we talk a lot about the kids, what's good for young people, at different ages, but what about preparing yourself to be in this conversation with young people, but also with adults about having that conversation with young people? What are some things that we need to keep in mind? Andres?
I think some things to keep in mind is to educate ourselves on there's mentioned we're going to provide resources at the end. I think there's already some resources in the chat. Just keep educating ourselves. Even I see it even watching, I have little kids, I work with little kids, and just watching the cartoons, even though I think I'm too old for it, I'm watching them, and I'm like, oh, wow, this is awesome. Did you see the message behind that comment or that episode? So that's one thing is educate. I would say to check ourselves and understand our biases, our own biases and what we have, because that plays a huge part in what we think about little kids. In some of the, in previous schools I worked in, there was a incident of a kindergarten kid that was a teacher said the kid got in trouble, and she said the kid spit on another kid, and that's what she put in the report, and that's what it was reported to the parents and all this stuff. In reality, the kid didn't spit. The kid just blew their tongue, or you make that noise like a, and that was a kid being a kid. But when you look at the report, it looks like the kid was angry and being disrespectful and spit on another kid. And that was because the kid was a Black kid who did that. And when we don't realize our biases, and when we think of certain kids and how we report something, how we say something, that can do a lot of damage to kids later on. So I think that's one part, is to just check our biases around.
Yeah. One of my favorite, we use this TED Talk a lot, is Renee Meyer's Walk Boldly Toward Your Biases. And someone wrote in chat, what do I do when my family says racist stuff, and I'm very conflict averse. I used to just be like, just ignore them, but she has some great suggestions, and I definitely had to eventually say, well, if I don't say anything, who's going to, yeah. Sarah, how about you? Thoughts about the adult prep?
Yeah, I'm not conflict averse. In fact, I think there are times where my husband's family just sort of cringes when they'll say something and they know that I have a breath that I take before I go, oh, that made me feel very uncomfortable. And I just kind of own why I felt uncomfortable. And I think, what Andreas said about examining bias is really the starting point for me in getting involved in anti-bias work, of really kind of thinking about my own experience growing up and my own experience as a parent. And then what does that mean for me as a parent and as a teacher? Really examining bias was important. And I think that other piece of continuing to educate myself. So I do a ton of reading, a lot of reflecting, and I think that's really what helps me stay poised for these conversations. I think as long as I look at my work as a journey and not an endpoint, I'm never going to get to the point where I know all there is to know about diversity. It's going to be something that I'm doing for the rest of my life, and something I want my children and my students to be doing for the rest of their life. Hopefully not in the same sort of hard, difficult way that we're currently doing it, but for the lifelong learning to be a part of these conversations.
Yeah. Andrea?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sarah and Andres definitely summed it up well, but I think, in reflection, I know, like I said, we're doing a professional development today, and part of it is the identity wheel. So kind of revisiting that and kind of thinking about how our identity, is part of the conversation, and where that puts us as educators. I think that's important, and or even as parents. And be part of the solution. I am, we're on different committees and part of the solution, I feel like, but we need more people who want to be part of the solution. So whether you educate or join an IDEA committee, or, I think that can be really helpful and impactful to work with others who are also wanting to either educate themselves more, or just, just be able to have those difficult conversations. And it can be difficult conversations with family too. You don't want to be confrontational, but you definitely want to call them out, especially if your children are there too, because you don't want to let something slide. Because later, your kids are going to be like, why didn't you say something? Like speak up, use your voice. But it does take courage. But I think in terms of, educating yourself and saying something is something to keep in mind.
Anybody got a mixed politics family? Yeah, I feel like these days we probably all do to some degree, right? So somebody wrote into text that this feels overwhelming, especially because it's so politicized, and why and how did this kind of thing, talking about race and history, become so politicized? And I'm curious if anyone has a thought or an answer about that.
My first response is that because it's really difficult to look at the biased practices you may have been involved in previously. I find that a lot of the legislation is coming forward from white men, and it's difficult to acknowledge that you have either benefited from a structure that is biased itself, or to kind of be in that place where you can have the reflection of, ooh, I've done some things that I feel uncomfortable with now, so it's easier to just shut it down and stop conversations from happening.
Thanks, Sarah. Andres? Any thoughts on that one?
I believe many people think this is political. It's because they don't see people of color as human, and they want to put something connected, kind of to Sarah's point, is they want to put something in the way to make them not believe that. So they connect it to politics. Part of it is the systems that were created. You have to change policy, you have to change rules, you have to change the way of life that many of us have been living, or been told this is how it's supposed to be. And in our country, that turns into it's a law, for people to follow it, it's people to believe it, it's people say, okay, now we have to do this in many spaces. So that's why I think it's political. But for me, I really believe that in a lot of spaces, it's political. It's because people do not want to see people of color as human. Yeah,
We have a history that bears that out.
Yeah.
And at as its heaviest, right? How do you, back to kids, help kids of color who are raised with this history, pushing through to a new time and finding their strength, and white kids raised with this history, there are white parents who worry that their kids are being told that they're bad because they're white, as opposed to we've done bad things in our history and we need to know about it. I think all of that does make it a fraught conversation in the sense of how much of the history do you talk about and to what kind of detail, to help a kid then navigate their own development, their own friendships, their own understanding of even being in these conversations. It can be kind of small, like you can find yourself just stepping into history that you didn't even know about. I'm wondering if anyone has some comments about really kind of the heaviest parts of this.
I think we already mentioned this too in terms of Dr. Beverly Tatum, but I think, the piece on my skin brown because I drank chocolate milk. She really, I don't know, I actually watched it last night again because I really enjoyed it, but she really is able to break it down in a way that almost builds up, Black people in her kind of discussion around it. And, talking about the resilience and strength, and, she talks about slavery in that, in a way that, people were taken from, taken to this country and put to work because they didn't want to do the work. And so, and that was unfair. I think she's able to talk about it in a way that's helpful. I think that's not, I don't want to say light, but it's in a way that lifts people up. Because I think in history, it doesn't, in our history classes, I don't feel like it was done justice that Black people were victimized, and that she really talks about. And so I think that I don't know, I keep talking about her, but I definitely highly recommend her work and the TED Talks, and just, I think it gives you a really nice, nice opening into the conversations and thinking about it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I love it. And I think the piece that you picked up on that you were talking about, like, I loved that, not only to address the fear of a child hearing something sad and horrible, but also to address the, balancing that victimization. It's just like, there were always people fighting it. There were people of all races who knew it was wrong. The Underground Railroad, like naming some of the stuff where there was resistance and and so much like clever resistance, quilts. And so anyway, I think that that it's really rich. It's really rich. So we just have a couple more minutes. I want to give you each a chance to just at least give us a takeaway, something that that you would hope folks would, think a little bit more about as they think about the kids in their lives and the adults in their lives who have the chance to have conversations with children about race. And we'll start with Andrea and then go to Sarah and Andres.
Sure. I would just say, and I said this, is be part of the solution. So, think about ways that you can definitely, join with others who are having these conversations. Again, we know that they can be difficult conversations, but I always say to my students, you're not going to grow unless you kind of, do something difficult, just do something hard. It's to step outside of your comfort zone. And so I think doing the work and, being part of the solution, having the conversations, working with others is good. And that's what we want to do as we think about our children.
Great. Thank you. Sarah?
I would say find a comfortable entry point. Be uncomfortable with the uncomfortable, or start to get comfortable with the uncomfortable, and know that you might not have all of the answers right at your fingertips, and finding a way to kind of say, you know what, I need some more time to think about how I should answer this question. I'm feeling like I might not have all the answers, and I want to make sure that I'm giving you the best information that I can. But I think, finding an entry point is important.
Great. And Andres, I know you're coming next. We got another question about if you're just starting and your kids are already in middle or high school, how do you start with those kids? And I'm going to make an assumption that we're talking about kids who are white and parents who are like, oh, I should have done this sooner. Now, what do I do? So curious if there's part of that, but go ahead, Andres, your takeout. We can come back to that question too.
Maybe my answer will connect to this question.
Mhm.
I'm not sure. But I think is to listen to our children from, kindergarten all the way through high school, and after, is listen and let them know that they might not know because their language is different, but listen in their language. Believe what they say. That's another big part is believe whatever someone is sharing with you is truth. It's their truth. And we listen, and I'm going to understand you, and I'm going to listen to you, and I'm going to, sorry you're going through that, and not try to automatically connect it. Well, maybe you're thinking about it in a different way, or maybe that really didn't happen. Believe their truth, and that is their truth. And so that's been my working with all kids from elementary, middle school, high school, is just believing what they're saying and letting them know, like, I hear you, and I understand you. This is a different, it's for a student of colors, but I've worked with high school students that their entire life, no one has ever talked to them about race. These are students of color, and never, ever spoke to them about race. And it's their senior year of high school. And I finally sat with them and I said, tell me about yourself. What are you going through? And they shared all the incidents that happened to them from kindergarten to middle school to high school. Of incidents, them wanting to be white, wake up and be white, wanting them to change their hair, change their name, not wanting to go to school, and telling me all these stories, and me not responding and saying, you know what, thank you for sharing, and I hear you, and that those students breaking down and saying no one in their entire, kindergarten through 12th grade they felt like they've been listened to or valued. So I think that's a huge thing. So it's never too late to start talking, because again, I've worked with seniors in the past that their senior year is their first time ever talking about this. And I'm working with white students and worked with white students who for the first time ever are learning the history of the N-word.
Mhm.
are learning, what racism really look like, what people are dealing with today, and that's okay. It's just having those real conversations with those students or children.
Yeah, no, that it seems to me, also we have a lot of trans racial adoptees in New Hampshire, and some of what you said, I think certainly applies. Well, thank you all so much, really, Sarah and Andres and Andrea for being a part of this panel and bringing your expertise and participating in your Wildcat community in this way, which is really great. If folks who are here want to share the webinar with anyone, it'll be posted later on the UNH Alumni webinar library. And that information and other resources will be emailed to you. And I saw some chat about other resources out there. Sarah probably has a big old list of books for young kids and other resources, but there's some really great stuff out there. And we hope you tune into other webinars in the future. And you can continue to watch the Alumni Network and social media channels for information. So again, thank you so much, Andrea, Andres, and Sarah. And thanks to UNH, Jen and JC, who helped make this happen today. So thanks, everyone, and have an awesome rest of your Tuesday.